Stand up right now and look at your left hand. If you're wearing a wedding ring, I want you to really look at it. Society told you it's a symbol of love, commitment, eternal bond. But what if I told you that Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most brutally honest philosophers who ever lived, saw something entirely different when he looked at that circle of metal? He saw a chain, not a metaphorical chain. An actual instrument of bondage that billions of people voluntarily lock around their own fingers, while crowds applaud and cameras flash. What you're about to hear will disturb you, because it challenges the single most romanticized institution in human civilization. But Schopenhauer didn't deal in romance. He dealt in reality. And the reality of what that ring represents, what it does to your life, what it costs you in ways you haven't even calculated yet. That's what we're going to dissect today with surgical precision. Here's something nobody tells you before you slide that ring on. The moment it goes on your finger, you cease to be a free agent in your own life. Every decision you make from that point forward gets filtered through someone else's needs, wants, expectations, and emotions. Where you live, how you spend money, what risks you can take, who you associate with, how you use your time, what dreams you're allowed to pursue, none of it is fully yours anymore. Schopenhauer watched this pattern repeat itself thousands of times in 19th century Germany, and he recognized it for what it was: voluntary slavery dressed up in flowers and vows. He saw men and women trading their autonomy for social approval, their freedom for the illusion of security, their individual potential for the comfort of conformity, and he was horrified by how eagerly people rushed toward their own imprisonment. Now I need to know something before we continue. What city are you in while you're watching this? Are you in New York, surrounded by millions of people living out this same pattern? Tokyo, where social pressure to marry is suffocating. Mumbai, where arranged marriages still dominate. Berlin, where Schopenhauer himself walked these streets seeing through the illusion. Drop your city below, because your geographical context shapes how intensely you feel the pressure to lock that chain around your finger. Schopenhauer had a concept he called the will to life, this blind, irrational force that drives all living things to reproduce and continue the species. And he recognized that nature doesn't care about your happiness. Nature doesn't care about your fulfillment or your dreams or your potential. Nature just wants you to make more humans, and it will use every trick in the book to make that happen. Romance is one of those tricks. The feeling of being in love, that intoxicating cocktail of obsession and desire that makes marriage seem like a good idea. Schopenhauer saw this as nature's anesthesia. It's the drug that numbs you to reality long enough to get you to put on the chain voluntarily. Think about how marriage proposals happen. They're theatrical productions designed to create maximum emotional pressure and minimum rational thought. Public proposals, family involvement, elaborate romantic gestures. These aren't about the couple making a clear-headed decision together. They're social mechanisms designed to make saying no almost impossible. You're not just rejecting a person, you're rejecting a performance, disappointing an audience, destroying a moment that's been carefully choreographed to manufacture your consent. Schopenhauer would recognize this as will to life working through social pressure, using shame and spectacle to override your rational self-interest. And once the ring is on, the chain gets heavier with each passing year. Financial entanglement means you can't make career moves without considering someone else's career, can't relocate for opportunities, can't take the entrepreneurial risks that might lead to real wealth because you've got joint accounts and shared mortgages and someone who needs stability. The wedding ring isn't just symbolic. It's a financial handcuff that links your economic fate to another person's risk tolerance, spending habits, and career trajectory. Schopenhauer understood that economic dependence was one of the primary mechanisms through which the chain of marriage constrained individual freedom. But the financial chain is just the beginning. There's the social chain, the way marriage integrates you into networks of obligation that extend far beyond your spouse. Suddenly you have in-laws with expectations, family gatherings you're required to attend, social events you must participate in, a whole extended family structure that now has legitimate claims on your time, energy, and resources. You didn't just marry one person. You married into a system, and that system has rules, norms, and expectations that you're now bound to honor whether you want to or not. Schopenhauer was particularly cynical about what he called the metaphysics of sexual love, the philosophical delusion that romantic love is something transcendent and special, rather than just biology tricking you into reproduction. He argued that all the poetry, all the romance, all the feelings that seem so profound and unique, they're just nature's way of ensuring genetic diversity and species continuation. The person you think is your soulmate, your perfect match, your destiny. According to Schopenhauer, they're just someone whose genetic profile complements yours in ways that would produce viable offspring. The feelings you interpret as love are just your genes recognizing a good breeding opportunity. Now, this sounds harsh, even cruel, but consider the implications. If Schopenhauer is right, if romantic love is fundamentally an illusion created by biological imperatives, then the wedding ring represents your willingness to restructure your entire life around a temporary chemical state. Because romantic love does fade. Study after study confirms this. The passionate obsession that characterizes early relationships typically lasts 18 months to 3 years. Then it transitions into something else: attachment, companionship, habit. But by the time this transition happens, you're already locked in. The ring is already on. The chain is already secured, and you've made permanent decisions based on temporary feelings. Schopenhauer observed that most people realize the truth about marriage only after they're already in it. Before marriage, they're intoxicated by romance and social approval. After marriage, they wake up to the reality of what they've agreed to. But by then, exiting is complicated, expensive, socially stigmatized, and often devastating to children if there are any. So most people stay, not because the marriage is fulfilling, but because leaving is harder than enduring. The ring becomes a reminder not of love, but of a choice they can't easily undo, a chain they voluntarily locked but can't easily remove. Let me be specific about what this chain actually restricts. Your time is no longer fully yours. You're expected to spend significant portions of it maintaining the relationship, attending to your spouse's emotional needs, participating in shared activities even when you'd rather be doing something else. Your space isn't yours. You share your living environment with someone whose habits, preferences, and needs must be accommodated. Your body isn't entirely yours. There are expectations around sexual availability, appearance maintenance, health behaviors. Your future isn't yours. Major life decisions require consensus, compromise, often abandonment of your preferred path. Schopenhauer never married. This is crucial to understanding his perspective. He watched from the outside as his friends and colleagues locked themselves into marriages, and then spent decades being slowly crushed by obligations they'd voluntarily assumed. He saw brilliant men abandon ambitious projects because family responsibilities consumed their time and energy. He saw talented women disappear into domestic roles that utilized none of their actual capabilities. And he concluded that marriage was fundamentally incompatible with the kind of life he valued, a life of intellectual freedom, creative autonomy, and philosophical inquiry. But here's where Schopenhauer's analysis gets even more disturbing. He argued that marriage serves social order more than individual happiness. Society needs people to be married because married people are stable, predictable, and controllable. They have mortgages to pay, so they can't quit jobs or take risks. They have families to support, so they can't rebel or opt out of the system. They have reputations to maintain, so they conform to social norms. The wedding ring is how society brands you as domesticated, as someone who's agreed to play by the rules, as someone who can be counted on to stay in line because you've given them leverage over you in the form of people you care about. This is why society celebrates marriage so enthusiastically. Every wedding is a victory for social order. Another free individual successfully contained, another potential disruptor neutralized, another person who's agreed to trade freedom for stability. The celebrations, the gifts, the public approval, these are rewards for your compliance. You're being congratulated for voluntarily entering a cage, and most people are so intoxicated by the attention and the romance that they don't even realize what's happening until years later when they're lying awake at night, wondering how they ended up in a life that feels nothing like what they imagined. Schopenhauer also recognized that marriage creates asymmetrical burdens, though his analysis of this was shaped by 19th century gender roles. But the underlying principle remains relevant. Marriage rarely distributes costs and benefits equally between partners. One person almost always sacrifices more of their autonomy, more of their ambitions, more of their individual identity. And that person often doesn't realize the disparity until they're years deep into the arrangement, and resentment has already taken root. The wedding ring marks the beginning of a slow-motion negotiation over who gives up what, and that negotiation often continues for decades. Consider the wedding ceremony itself, through Schopenhauer's cynical lens. It's a public performance where you make promises that are literally impossible to keep. Till death do us part means you're committing to feel the same way about this person 40 or 50 years from now as you do today, despite the fact that both of you will change dramatically over that time. You're promising to forsake all others, to remain sexually and romantically exclusive to one person for the rest of your life, despite the fact that human beings are not naturally monogamous, and that sexual attraction to others doesn't magically disappear because you put on a ring. These promises aren't meant to be realistic. They're meant to bind you through guilt and social pressure. When you inevitably struggle with them, when you find yourself attracted to someone else, or questioning your choice or feeling trapped, you're supposed to feel like a failure, like you're violating sacred vows. But Schopenhauer would argue that you're not failing. The promises were always impossible. They were designed to be impossible. Because impossible promises create permanent guilt, and permanent guilt is a very effective chain. Schopenhauer wrote extensively about suffering, and he identified desire as the primary source of human misery. We want things we don't have, and that wanting creates suffering. When we get what we want, the satisfaction is temporary, and soon we're desiring something else. This endless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction is what he called the pendulum of existence, swinging between wanting and boredom. Now apply this framework to marriage. Before marriage, you desire companionship, security, social validation, perhaps children. The wedding ring promises to satisfy all these desires. But Schopenhauer understood that satisfying one set of desires just creates space for new desires to emerge, often desires that are now impossible to pursue because of the constraints marriage imposes. The married man might desire freedom to travel spontaneously, but he has a spouse who needs advanced planning and shared decision-making. He might desire to pursue a risky career change, but he has financial obligations that require stability. He might desire solitude and independence, but he has relationship maintenance requirements that consume his time. The ring hasn't ended his suffering by satisfying his desires. It's just replaced one set of unsatisfied desires with another set. And often the new set is more frustrating because he chose the very constraints that now prevent their satisfaction. He locked his own chain. What makes this particularly cruel is the social prohibition against admitting regret. If you express dissatisfaction with marriage, you're immediately labeled as the problem. You're not trying hard enough. You're being selfish. You need therapy. You need to work on yourself. The possibility that marriage itself might be structured in a way that's fundamentally incompatible with human flourishing, that's not something you're allowed to consider seriously. Schopenhauer recognized this silencing mechanism as essential to maintaining the institution. If people could speak honestly about the costs of marriage without being shamed, fewer people would agree to it. So honesty must be suppressed, and the chain must be celebrated. The economic reality of modern marriage reveals the chain with particular clarity. When you marry, you're not just making an emotional commitment. You're entering a legally binding financial contract that gives your spouse claim to half of everything you earn and acquire during the marriage. In most jurisdictions, divorce means splitting assets regardless of who earned them or who was more financially responsible. The wedding ring marks the moment when your economic fate becomes tied to another person's decisions, habits, and behaviors. You can work harder, earn more, save diligently, and still end up impoverished if your spouse makes poor financial choices or if the marriage ends. Schopenhauer lived during an era when marriage was more explicitly economic, when dowries and financial arrangements were openly discussed. Modern marriage pretends to be about love rather than economics, but the legal and financial structures are just as binding, perhaps more so because they're disguised by romantic ideology. You're not supposed to think about the fact that you're entering a contract that could cost you half your wealth. You're supposed to focus on love and commitment and partnership, But the contract exists whether you think about it or not, and the ring on your finger is evidence that you've signed it. The chain also manifests in what Schopenhauer would call the denial of the will. His philosophy emphasized the importance of denying or transcending the blind will to life, the biological and social forces that drive human behavior toward reproduction and conformity. Marriage represents complete surrender to this will. You're agreeing to let biology and social pressure dictate the structure of your life. You're abandoning any aspiration to transcend these forces and instead embracing them fully. The wedding ring is a symbol of that surrender, a visible marker that you've stopped fighting and accepted your role in nature's reproductive machinery. Schopenhauer was deeply influenced by Eastern philosophy, particularly Buddhism and Hinduism, which emphasized detachment from worldly desires as a path to enlightenment. Marriage is the opposite of detachment. It's maximum attachment, binding yourself legally, financially, emotionally, and socially to another person, and to the entire social structure that marriage supports. From this perspective, the wedding ring isn't just a chain, it's an anchor that prevents any possibility of the kind of spiritual or philosophical freedom that Schopenhauer considered essential for a meaningful existence. Let's talk about children, because this is where the chain becomes almost impossible to remove. Schopenhauer was clear that having children was the ultimate trap, the point at which nature completely wins and individual freedom completely ends. Children create obligations that last decades and expenses that consume enormous resources. They demand time, attention, and emotional energy that could have gone toward personal development, creative work, or intellectual pursuits. And once they exist, you can't undo that choice. You can divorce a spouse, but you can't divorce children. The ring might come off, but the obligations created by reproduction last until you die. Society romanticizes parenthood just as it romanticizes marriage, but Schopenhauer would argue, this is more anesthesia, more will to life manipulating you through emotion, so you'll make choices that serve species continuation, rather than individual flourishing. The reality of parenthood is often grinding routine, financial strain, loss of personal identity, and decades of worry and responsibility. But you're not supposed to say this. You're supposed to post happy family photos and talk about how blessed you are and pretend that the chain doesn't exist. And the more you perform this happiness, the more trapped you become because you've publicly committed to a narrative you can't abandon without massive social consequences. The wedding ring also functions as a signal to others, and this signaling aspect reveals another dimension of the chain. When people see the ring, they treat you differently. Opportunities that might have been available to you as a single person disappear. Certain social spaces become off-limits. Behaviors that would have been acceptable are now inappropriate. The ring tells the world that you're owned, that you're spoken for, that you're no longer available for certain types of connection or experience. It's a brand, marking you as domesticated, as safe, as contained within acceptable boundaries. Schopenhauer observed that people in unhappy marriages often stay together for decades because the pain of staying seems less than the pain of leaving. Divorce means admitting failure, disappointing family, potentially damaging children, dividing assets, restructuring your entire life. It's often easier to just endure, to accept the chain and stop fighting against it. And this is exactly how the institution perpetuates itself. It makes entry easy and exit painful, ensuring that even people who realize they've made a mistake stay trapped by the consequences of their choice. The philosophical question Schopenhauer would pose is this: why does a healthy relationship need a legal contract, social ceremony, and physical symbol? If two people genuinely want to be together, they can be together without any of these things. The ring and the ceremony and the legal binding, these exist to create exit costs, to make it harder to leave when the initial passion fades and reality sets in. They exist to trap you. And the fact that society insists on these mechanisms, that relationships without them are considered less legitimate, reveals that marriage is fundamentally about social control rather than individual happiness. Think about the language we use around marriage. We say someone is tied down or settling down. We talk about taking someone off the market or locking it down. These phrases accidentally reveal the truth that the romantic mythology tries to conceal. Marriage is about constraint, about limitation, about ending possibilities, and cementing yourself in a particular life trajectory. The wedding ring is the physical manifestation of this ending, this closing off of potential futures in favor of one predetermined path. Schopenhauer would point out that the people most enthusiastic about promoting marriage are usually either those who have never experienced it, those who are so deep in it they've accepted their chains, or those who benefit from other people being married. Young people who've only known romance push for marriage because they haven't experienced the reality yet. Long-married people promote it because admitting they made a mistake would be too psychologically devastating. And institutions, religious, governmental, corporate, promote it because married people are easier to control, predict, and exploit. The wedding ring industry itself is a perfect example of manufactured meaning. Diamonds for engagement rings only became traditional in the 20th century due to aggressive marketing by diamond companies. The idea that you should spend months of salary on a ring is pure advertising, not tradition. But millions of people comply with this expectation, going into debt to buy expensive jewelry they can't afford, because the ring has been invested with such symbolic weight that buying a modest one feels like you're not properly committed, or you're somehow failing at the performance of romance. Schopenhauer would see this as tragic comedy, watching people impoverish themselves buying overpriced compressed carbon to symbolize their entry into an institution that will likely make them miserable. But they do it because the chain isn't just legal and financial, it's psychological and social. You internalize the belief that the ring matters, that its size and cost reflect something meaningful, that without proper symbols and ceremonies your relationship isn't legitimate. And once you've internalized these beliefs, you police yourself more effectively than any external authority could. The chain of marriage also restricts personal growth and transformation. Schopenhauer understood that individuals change over time, that the person you are at 25 is radically different from who you'll be at 45. But marriage is based on the fantasy that people remain static, that the person you marry today will be essentially the same person decades from now. When you or your spouse inevitably changes, grows, develops new interests or values or goals, the marriage often becomes a constraint preventing that growth. You can't pursue the new direction because it would disrupt the established dynamic, disappoint your partner, threaten the stability of the relationship. The psychological chain becomes even more apparent when you examine how marriage affects individual identity over time. Schopenhauer believed that selfhood was something to be carefully guarded, that losing yourself in collective identity was a form of spiritual death. But marriage actively encourages this dissolution of individual identity. You stop being a person and become half of a couple. Your preferences get negotiated into compromises. Your goals get filtered through someone else's priorities. Your very sense of self becomes entangled with another person's perception of you. The wedding ring marks the beginning of this identity erosion, and for many people, by the time they've been married for a decade or two, they can barely remember who they were before the ring went on. This loss of self manifests in countless small ways. You stop doing things you used to enjoy because your spouse isn't interested. You adopt opinions and preferences that aren't really yours to maintain harmony. You make career choices based on someone else's needs rather than your own aspirations. You present a version of yourself to the world that's been edited and approved by your partner. And gradually, imperceptibly, the edited version becomes the only version. The chain has successfully transformed you from an autonomous individual into a component of a marital unit, and the transformation is so gradual that you often don't notice until it's complete. Schopenhauer wrote that life is suffering, and the only escape from suffering is through the negation of will, the reduction of desires and attachments. Marriage represents the opposite philosophy. It's maximum attachment, maximum desire, maximum entanglement with the world. You're attaching yourself to another person, to shared property, to potential children, to extended family networks, to social expectations. Every attachment is another source of potential suffering, because anything you're attached to can cause you pain through loss, disappointment, or conflict. The wedding ring symbolizes your willingness to multiply your sources of suffering exponentially. Consider how marriage affects your relationship with death. which was central to Schopenhauer's philosophy. As a single person, death primarily concerns you. As a married person, especially with children, death becomes terrifying because of all the people who depend on you. You can't take risks. You can't pursue dangerous but meaningful experiences. You have to stay safe, stay alive, stay productive, because others need you. The chain extends even to your relationship with mortality, making you more afraid, more cautious, more constrained in how you live because dying would mean abandoning your obligations. Schopenhauer also understood that marriage creates a specific kind of suffering through comparison and competition. You constantly compare your marriage to others, wondering if you chose the right person, if other people are happier, if you're missing out on something better. Your spouse compares you to other potential partners they might have chosen, to idealized versions of what a spouse should be. This comparison creates perpetual dissatisfaction because there's always someone who seems to have it better, and the ring prevents you from pursuing those seemingly better options. You're locked in, watching others and wondering if the grass really is greener, but never able to find out. The institution of marriage also creates what Schopenhauer would recognize as false consciousness, a systematic misunderstanding of your own situation. You're taught to interpret your constraints as choices, your obligations as privileges, your loss of freedom as gaining something valuable. When you feel trapped, you're told you're not trapped, you're committed. When you feel burdened, you're told you're not burdened, you're responsible. The language around marriage is specifically designed to prevent you from accurately perceiving your own condition. And the wedding ring is the physical anchor for this false consciousness, a constant reminder of the story you're supposed to tell yourself about what it represents. Schopenhauer's pessimism about human nature included the recognition that we're remarkably good at self-deception. We convince ourselves that we're happy when we're not, that our sacrifices are meaningful when they're not, that our choices were wise when they weren't. Marriage requires enormous amounts of this self-deception to be sustainable. You have to convince yourself that the person you married is uniquely special, despite billions of other humans on the planet. You have to convince yourself that your relationship is different, that you won't experience the statistical likelihood of decreased satisfaction over time. You have to convince yourself that the constraints you've accepted are actually freedoms. The wedding ring facilitates this self-deception by serving as a tangible focus for your investment in the narrative. You've spent money on it. You've had a ceremony around it. You wear it every day where others can see it. The more you've invested in the symbol, the harder it becomes to acknowledge that what it symbolizes might not be what you thought. This is the sunk cost fallacy applied to your entire life. You've put so much into marriage, emotionally, financially, temporally, that admitting it was a mistake becomes almost impossible. So you double down, you invest more, and the chain gets heavier. Schopenhauer would argue that the truly free individual is one who has minimized attachments, who has learned to want less rather than more, who has achieved a kind of philosophical detachment from the desires that trap most people. Marriage makes this impossible. It multiplies your attachments and desires. Now you don't just want things for yourself, you want things for your spouse, for your children, for your family unit. Now you don't just fear for your own well-being, you fear for theirs. Now you don't just have your own problems, you have their problems too. The ring marks your abandonment of any aspiration toward philosophical freedom in favor of maximum worldly entanglement. The economic chains of marriage extend beyond just shared assets. There's the opportunity cost of paths not taken because you were married, the business you didn't start because it was too risky with a family depending on you, the career change you didn't make because it would have required relocation or a pay cut, the investments you didn't pursue because you needed liquid savings for family emergencies. Every one of these foregone opportunities represents potential wealth, success, or fulfillment that you sacrificed. And unlike the tangible costs of marriage, these opportunity costs are invisible, which makes them easier to ignore but no less real. Schopenhauer observed that humans have a remarkable capacity to normalize suffering. We adapt to almost any condition, no matter how suboptimal, and begin treating it as natural and inevitable. This is exactly what happens in long-term marriages. The initial shock of lost freedom fades. The constraints become familiar. You develop routines and coping mechanisms. Eventually, you can't even imagine life without the chain, because you've worn it so long it feels like part of you. This normalization is how the institution perpetuates itself across generations. People who've adapted to their chains encourage others to forge their own, genuinely believing they're offering good advice rather than recruiting others into the same trap. The social pressure to marry is itself a form of chain, and Schopenhauer would recognize it as the will to life operating through collective consciousness. Your family wants you to marry because that's how society reproduces itself. Your married friends want you to marry because your freedom is an uncomfortable reminder of what they've given up. Society wants you to marry because married people are more stable, more productive, more controllable. All of these forces converge to create enormous pressure to put on the ring. And resisting that pressure requires more strength than most people possess. So they comply, and another chain is locked. Schopenhauer's contemporary relevance becomes clear when you examine modern marriage statistics. Divorce rates hover around 50% in many Western countries, indicating that at least half of people who put on the ring eventually try to remove it despite all the costs and difficulties. And these statistics only capture the people who actually divorce. They don't count the countless marriages where people stay together despite being miserable, where the chain remains locked, not because it's wanted, but because removing it seems worse than enduring it. The real failure rate of marriage as an institution for human happiness is probably much higher than divorce statistics suggest. The wedding ring also serves as a mechanism of social surveillance. Other people notice when you're not wearing it. They ask questions. They make assumptions. If you're married and you remove your ring, even temporarily, people interpret this as signaling availability or marital problems. The ring allows others to police your behavior, to enforce the obligations you've undertaken, to remind you of your role. Schopenhauer would see this as society outsourcing the work of maintaining your chain to everyone around you. You're not just constrained by your spouse or by law. You're constrained by the constant observation and judgment of everyone who sees that ring on your finger. The philosophical tragedy, from Schopenhauer's perspective, is that marriage could theoretically be different. Two individuals could choose to share their lives without legal contracts, without social ceremonies, without symbols of ownership. They could maintain separate finances, separate spaces, separate identities while still enjoying companionship and partnership. But this isn't what marriage is. Marriage is specifically the legal, social, and symbolic binding that creates all the constraints we've discussed. And society insists on these bindings, which reveals that the institution is fundamentally about control rather than about facilitating healthy relationships. Schopenhauer's own life demonstrated that meaningful existence was possible without marriage. He produced philosophical works that have influenced thinkers for nearly 2 centuries. He maintained friendships and intellectual relationships. He traveled and studied and thought deeply about human existence. He experienced the full range of human emotion and understanding without ever locking himself into the particular constraints that marriage imposes. His life proves that the narrative that marriage is necessary for fulfillment or meaning is false. It's possible, perhaps even easier, to live a rich and significant life without ever putting on the ring. The final insight Schopenhauer would offer is this: the wedding ring is an honest symbol, but not in the way most people understand it. It honestly represents what marriage is: a binding, a constraint, a chain. The dishonesty is in calling this chain love, in pretending that restriction is freedom, in celebrating the moment someone locks themselves into an institution that will likely diminish their autonomy, happiness, and potential. The ring doesn't lie. We lie about what the ring means, and that lie is maintained through massive social pressure, cultural mythology, and our own desperate need to believe that our sacrifices were meaningful rather than tragic mistakes. Now here's what I need from you, and this is crucial for your own clarity. Drop a comment telling me honestly what freedom you've sacrificed or would sacrifice by putting on a wedding ring. Not the romantic answer, the real answer. What would you lose? What would become impossible? What part of yourself would die? Be specific and be honest, because acknowledging the true cost is the only way to make an informed decision about whether that cost is worth paying. Subscribe to this channel immediately, because we're providing philosophical frameworks that allow you to see through the romantic mythology and understand the actual mechanics of social institutions. This content gives you the analytical tools to examine your own life honestly, rather than through the distorting lens of cultural narrative. Hit subscribe now because understanding these patterns might save you from making irreversible choices based on temporary emotions and social pressure that you'll regret for decades. Smash that like button because this video challenges one of the most protected institutions in society, and it needs to reach people before they make permanent decisions based on incomplete information. Your like pushes this content to someone who's being pressured to propose, someone who's doubting their engagement, someone who's already feeling the weight of the chain and wondering if they're crazy for noticing it. Every like is potentially preventing someone from making a choice they can't undo. Keep watching because the next video reveals something even more disturbing about how institutions manipulate your deepest desires and biological drives to serve purposes that have nothing to do with your well-being. We're going to expose mechanisms of control that operate so far beneath conscious awareness that most people never even realize they're being manipulated. What's coming will fundamentally change how you understand every major life decision you've made or are considering making. You cannot afford to miss this because it completes the picture of how modern society manufactures consent for institutions that don't serve individual flourishing.